All right, let's jump right into this explainer. Today, we're unpacking a day that literally changed aviation history forever. We're going back to March 27, 1977, to look at a sequence of events so wildly improbable you honestly wouldn't believe it if you saw it in a movie. Let's break down the exact steps that created this perfect, tragic storm.
So the biggest question we have to ask right up front is, how does a disaster of this absolute magnitude happen entirely on the ground? I mean, when we think of plane crashes, we almost always picture mid-air failures or terrible storms up in the sky, right? But today, we're talking about two massive Boeing 747s, a Pan Am jet and a KLM jet, colliding on solid Earth. This tragedy resulted in 583 fatalities. That makes it aviation's deadliest day. And again, not a single one of those deaths happened in the air. It's a staggering, really heavy number, and it absolutely forces us to ask, how could the very systems designed to keep us perfectly safe fail so completely while both of these aircraft were just taxiing on a runway?
Act 1. A deadly chain reaction.
You see, the dominoes didn't actually start falling anywhere near the crash site. The disaster began on a neighboring island in the Canaries, Gran Canaria, starting with a flower shop and a ticking suitcase. Two members of a separatist group planted a bomb in the Las Palmas airport terminal. It detonated, thankfully killing no one, but then a phone call warned of more bombs. With the threat of multiple explosives, authorities had literally no choice but to shut the whole airport down. This forced 6 incoming flights, including our massive Pan Am and KLM 747s, to divert to a tiny regional airport on the nearby island of Tenerife, called Los Rodeos.
Now, Los Rodeos was completely ill-prepared for this sudden, massive influx of jumbo jets. This wasn't some huge international hub. It was a small facility sitting 2,000 feet up in the mountains. It only had a single runway, absolutely no ground radar to see where planes were, and just 2 controllers frantically trying to manage the chaos using only voice radio. Talk about a recipe for disaster.
Act 2. The fog rolls in.
As all these diverted planes sat idle, the environmental and psychological pressures really started to mount. The Pan Am crew had actually wanted to stay in the air. They had plenty of fuel, but they were ordered to land. So suddenly, there's this massive traffic jam of aircraft parked on the only taxiway. Inside the KLM jet, the tension was through the roof. KLM's captain Jacob Veldhuizen van Zanten, who, by the way, was literally the face of the airline, his picture was in their magazine ads. He was in a massive rush. It's wildly ironic that their top safety expert was the one feeling this pressure. But exceeding strict Dutch duty time limits meant risking his pilot's license or even jail time. He was obsessively checking the clock, terrified of being forced to delay the flight overnight.
Driven by that ticking clock, Captain Van Zanten makes a fateful decision. He decides to refuel right there in Tenerife to save time later. He takes on a massive 55,000 liters of fuel. And get this, literally 3 minutes after he starts pumping, word comes in that the original airport has reopened. But now, KLM is stuck fueling for the next 30 minutes. Pan Am was parked directly behind them and just wanted to slip by to take off. The Pan Am crew even went out and measured it. They needed 140 feet of clearance to pass, but the gap was short by just 12 feet. That tiny 12-foot shortfall ended up costing them a critical 30 minutes.
During that 30-minute wait for KLM to finish fueling, the weather at 4:50 p.m. was actually pretty decent. They had a very clear 2,000 meters of visibility. If they had only been able to leave right at that moment, everything would have been perfectly fine.
But by 5:02 p.m., thick mountain fog rolled in, plummeting visibility to a blinding 300 meters. Without that ground radar we mentioned earlier, the controllers were now completely blind. They couldn't see the planes, and the planes couldn't see each other. They had to rely entirely on wireless radio communication just to figure out who was where.
Act 3. The fatal miscommunication. With zero visibility and failing lights, the stage was set for what is probably aviation's most heavily analyzed minute of miscommunication. The tower had a plan. KLM would taxi all the way down the main runway, turn 180 degrees, and wait for takeoff. Pan Am was told to follow them down that same runway, but exit halfway down so KLM could take off right over them. The tower instructed Pan Am to take the third exit, C3, but trying to navigate a 340-ton jet through a sharp 135-degree turn in thick fog, it's incredibly difficult. Looking at their charts, the Pan Am crew saw the fourth exit, C4, only required a smooth 45-degree turn. Confused by the blinding fog and the controller's heavy accent, Pan Am assumed the tower just must have meant C4, so they kept rolling, searching for it in the mist, while still on the active runway.
Meanwhile, up ahead, KLM is in position, and Van Zanten is stressing about his time limit. He pushes the throttles without actual takeoff clearance. His co-pilot nervously stops him, gets air traffic routing clearance over the radio, but then Van Zanten starts moving again, saying, "We are going." The co-pilot frantically radios the tower, "We are now at takeoff." The tower, assuming KLM is just waiting in position, says, "Okay, stand by for takeoff, I will call you." Hearing this, Pan Am instantly jumps on the radio to warn everyone, shouting, "We are still taxiing down the runway."
And here is where fate stepped in. Because the tower and Pan Am transmitted their messages at the exact same millisecond, the radio signals overlapped. This caused a phenomenon known as a heterodyne effect, which basically resulted in a 3.75-second screech of static in the KLM cockpit. Those life-saving messages, "Stand by," and "We are still taxiing," were completely blocked out.
Act 4. Collision on the runway. Believing the path was clear based on that silence, the KLM jumbo jet accelerated directly into the blinding fog, hurtling toward a plane they couldn't see. Moments after that radio static, the tower asked Pan Am to report when they were clear. The KLM flight engineer heard this and voiced a chilling final doubt in the cockpit. He asked, "Is he not clear, that Pan American?" But Captain Van Zanten, absolutely certain in his authority, confidently and tragically dismissed the concern, saying, "Oh yes." He missed the absolute last chance to hit the brakes and avert disaster.
Suddenly, out of the fog, Pan Am saw the landing lights of the KLM jet charging right at them at 100 miles per hour. Pan Am desperately applied full thrust to get off the runway, maxing out at just 19 miles per hour. KLM saw them. Captain Van Zanten yanked the yoke back to fly over them. But remember that refueling decision? The 50 extra tons of fuel they had just taken on made the plane way too heavy. It just couldn't climb fast enough. The tail dragged along the tarmac in a shower of sparks, and the KLM's engines and landing gears sliced completely through the upper deck of the Pan Am jet.
This timeline really reveals the ultimate cruelty of the environment that day. At 5:06 p.m., the collision occurs. A massive fireball erupts, causing absolute devastation. And then, just 4 minutes later, at 5:10 p.m., the thick fog completely and magically lifted, restoring clear visibility to the entire airport. If any single delay hadn't happened, if the fog had lifted just 4 minutes earlier, hundreds of lives would have been saved.
Act 5. Rules written in blood. As investigators unraveled the true cause of this unthinkable event, KLM officials were totally stunned. When they first heard of the crash, they actually wanted to send their top safety expert, Captain Van Zanten, to investigate. They literally couldn't believe he was the one flying the plane. How could their very best instructor make such a catastrophic error? Well, the root cause came down to a phenomenon known as cockpit culture. Despite knowing they lacked takeoff clearance, the KLM co-pilot, who had literally been given his flying certification by Van Zanten, was just too intimidated to forcefully stop his boss. The flight engineer had doubts, right? But he didn't push back. They were simply too fearful of the legendary captain's authority to hit the brakes, and that hesitation proved fatal. Investigators often use the Swiss cheese model to explain things like this. Basically, there was no single villain here. Every system has holes, but disasters only happen when all the holes line up perfectly. An initial bomb threat, a tiny airport, a 12-foot blockage, suddenly dropping fog, a 3.75-second radio glitch, and a fearful cockpit culture, they all align perfectly to create this absolute nightmare.
This disaster completely revolutionized the aviation industry. It led directly to the creation of Crew Resource Management, or CRM. Today, co-pilots are rigorously trained and actually required to challenge their captains if they see something wrong. It completely dismantled that old "captain is God" mentality, proving the incredibly dark industry adage that safety rules are truly written in blood.
So I want to leave you with this final thought to consider the next time you're sitting on a delayed tarmac. When you're frustrated by those repetitive safety checks, the double confirmations over the intercom, and just sitting around waiting for clearance, remember that those boring, tedious rules exist precisely because of the 583 people who lost their lives on a foggy runway in Tenerife. Thanks so much for joining me on this explainer today, and I hope this helps you keep questioning the world around you.